that is the subject of today's today's interview. So what I said in the first couple of minutes was, first, we're here at MBC Studios, and I thank them for giving us the space here in Minneapolis. And then I mentioned this book, because this book is it's kind of the background for this interview, and how Victor gave it to me a couple of weeks ago, and it was written by a former member of the cult that Victor was a part of, written by a former member who is now disgruntled, left the cult, and did a sort of a tell-all book about it. And in the book, he says some extraordinary things about his own life and his own experience with the cult. So this was a New York Times best-selling author that was in this cult, and so influenced, I guess, so in awe of the leader of this cult, which, by the way, MSIA, Movement for Spiritual Inner Awareness, and they were based out of Southern California. This author was so enthralled by the leader of the cult, who went by the name of John Roger, hyphenated name, not his birth name. He was so enthralled by this man that he believed the cult leader, when the cult leader told him, "You have AIDS and you're going to die, 6 months to live," something like that. And this author of the book, Peter McWilliams, freaked out, and he believed it. And then the cult leader said, "But you can live if you author books and put me as a co-author, write books for the cult, books on self-help, spiritual principles, ways to live without fear and be free, and these sort of general spiritual principles." After the author admits to these extraordinary claims and these extraordinary just place in his mind where he was with this cult, he then goes back to the beginning of his life, or at least his experience being introduced. And in that story, we introduce ourselves to Victor, because at the author's first seminar, introducing himself to this organization, he meets Victor, who, by the way, he describes in the book as being very very handsome,
right.
And all that. So he thought very highly of you right from the start, and that just goes to show how that was you in your 20s. You were a very young man then, right? 25, 24, I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, I was around that, yeah.
Yeah, very young. And so this is where I introduced Victor, and he then talked about how he got to be a minister in this organization. So why don't we just go back to how you met, how you were introduced to MSIA, and then how you eventually became a minister.
Well, I came through, I had a job prior to this that left me marooned on an island, and that can be set aside. Just to let you know, psychologically, I was in a sort of isolated space, had not been around people, and then was suddenly introduced to this group in an evening, which was very warm and very
And you were about 22?
Embracive, 23 years old.
Okay.
And the guru guy paid attention to me.
Okay.
And for somebody who was coming from an outside, this is extraordinary. He got all these worshipers around, and he's got, he at least smiled at me and he said hello. So when I left the place, and again, this is a little bit to show why Peter would be negotiating a contract for his life, because it sounds a little strange.
Yeah, Peter, the author again, who thought he had AIDS.
It seems very strange to think, how could anybody believe that? But you have to understand, Peter had already been indoctrinated.
Right.
And so when you understand how far he was in before he would actually look at John Roger as one who could actually hold death from the door for him, that part needs to be understood most.
Yeah, we'll get into that. We're going to talk, Victor will share his story, and then we'll get into some more of the principles, like the psychological aspects of how the heck, it can get to that point where you believe every word of the leader of your cult, even when the words are unbelievable.
And that was the way it was for me. I mean, I would second guess my own reality. In fact, it was a practice of mine when I became a member of the inner staff, the core, that I would check with John Roger what was an interpretation from my dream. And if it was completely counter to what I thought, I would take his. Now, I didn't get directly, I was not a staff member right away. There was a year where I went to Colorado and I spent time working and meditating. I had bought a picture of him because one of the meditations involved mocking up images of your teacher and using him as a guide. And at some point, if you did the meditation right, he would appear to you in the spiritual world in your inner meditation. And that's when you knew you had contact.
And did you?
I did. I was actually in San Diego at the time. Vincent and I had gone down there to stay for a while. And I was basically on a fast for about 8 days. And I was doing meditation, morning to night.
What was the fasting all about? Why that?
It was just a matter of partly because I hardly had any money. And then the other thing was just a certain kind of cleanse. And this was my goal, is to find out how I could connect to this person spiritually.
So you got to the seminar, you were immediately impressed, and then you
went out to California.
Okay.
And we went down to San Diego for this period of time. This is basically in 77-ish or so right now, as I recall. I finally had this moment where this man appeared. He was in kind of a golden light. I was sitting there quietly in my meditation, and his penis was exposed.
When you saw...
Listen here.
Yeah.
I was shocked. I was in this totally serene place. I finally got my goal. Only there's this one thing out of place. I cannot tell you. It's like waking up from a dream when you're falling off a cliff and you're just shaken awake.
When you say you saw him, do you mean you saw him with your eyes
inwardly?
closed?
Absolutely. Inwardly, I was in this space,
Okay.
and finally the thing was achieved where finally you got that space where you're going to see the spiritual traveler, the mystical traveler. That's what this guy was supposed to be. This was the culmination
John Roger.
John Roger. He said that you had to practice and practice, and then he would appear to you inwardly, and then he would connect with you and lead you to the higher realms. That's the way this was. It's called soul travel.
Uh-huh.
And you were supposed to be able to hook up with this mystical traveler, and he would lead you out of the body into the higher spaces.
So you didn't like see him as an image before you with your eyes open. You saw him with your mind's eye.
It was in the mind's eye.
Got it. Okay.
Now, what would you think would happen if somebody had that experience? What would you do if you had that? What would go to your mind?
It's such an odd detail to be
right. So what would be your conclusion?
Honestly, if I was young and impressionable, I would wonder, am I attracted to this man, or do I have some kind of untapped knowledge or desire for this man that I'm not aware of? I would start to question my own sexuality, probably.
Fantastic, and exactly what I did.
Yeah.
I came out of there feeling absolutely depraved, to take this high holy moment that had just happened, and there's something so dark and sinister and so redeemed about me that I had suddenly ruined the whole thing. Now,
so you felt really guilty
again, but then let's go back psychologically. If you were actually a scientist about this and looked at that, what else could have been a conclusion at that moment?
That you hadn't eaten in 8 days and you were meditating all the time?
Or the fact that this man had designs on you. And this was a spiritual world saying, here he is, and this is what it's really about.
So you're suggesting there may have been a spiritual connection between you two?
I would simply say that the spiritual world, which was what I was connecting to, may have been leaving me a message pretty plainly saying, listen, he's definitely wants this to happen.
Okay, this is interesting happening. Because...
But I'm just saying that when you go into these cults, everything is about attribution and interpretation. I honestly was given a moment of grace there. Had I been able to perceive and see things as they were, I would have headed out the door the other way.
Like this is his intention. Precisely. And that's a foreshadow of what your experience would be like.
He wasn't going to hit on me technically for another year. But the fact that I had so put this down as myself being impure.
What a curse to have that vision, because then when he did hit on you, you felt this is foretold.
there's a long way to go. That was 1 year. But the thing is, he had taken me on staff, but he never hit on me, really. He was just, there's a sort of way he preened me. We'd be driving along.
Can we hold on to that
okay,
for a second? Because if people missed the audio at the beginning of this live stream, because the audio wasn't working, but we'll have it up when we put the episode up as a real YouTube video. You talked about religion in a pejorative way. At least it came off to me like...
I used the word cult for it.
You used the word cult, but you also equated this cult with Christian cult, Lutheran or whatever it was. You were a
missionary kid, right?
You were a missionary kid. You were in Madagascar, and you said that your father, was teaching imaginary things to people there, and So I got the impression that you were like atheists. You were quite dismissive of all things spiritual, and then you say now though that you had this vision. And you really think that vision was from the spiritual world?
Without question. But let me just go back. I wasn't talking about my father's work as being necessarily negative. I'm just looking objectively at what takes place here.
Got it.
Cults are cults.
Got it.
In the Bahamas, the Lutheran Church is not called a church. It's called a Lutheran cult, Baptist cult, Christian.
Sure.
All this stuff is just named that way.
Got it.
And the what happens for children when they get born into these things, you don't question these things. Of
course. Yeah.
You live. It's like the water you swim in every day. So, I don't remember even questioning whether there was a God until I was like 18 years old, 17.
Yeah.
It's like the first time. Can you imagine that? But so these things were just sort of accepted non-critically. Okay. Now the question is, you now get into another group. And one of the things you've been raised with, of course, is homosexuality. I didn't even know what it was until I was in late high school. But then it was clearly told to me that it was like the worst sin in the world. So when I'm in this inner place and get this religious experience that I've been working hard, fasting to get.
Yeah. If you're 8 days into something intensely,
right, and then all of a sudden
nonstop,
this happens, it's like shocking.
So you thought it was an image or a message to say what?
Well, to me, it was that I was so depraved that I would impose sexuality over this holy man.
I see.
He became holy. It had nothing to do with him, what I was seeing. I'm just saying another part of a person who was a scientist would say, well, that's very interesting that he would show up and I would have that. Might that have something to do with him? That was never, ever even thought, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I think we need to get to a place in spiritual science where we ask those questions.
Would a scientist, I actually question whether a scientist would say that had something to do with him, because they would say that was just a vision of yours and it had nothing to do with his, unless you somehow had, you said in that first seminar that he was paying a lot of attention to you, or at least some attention to you. So I think someone who didn't buy into the spiritual world, which, if someone says they're a person of science and they're very, they might dismiss anything spiritual, then they would say, well, maybe you did that one either because you were fasting for 8 days and meditating, and maybe you just had maybe you had some inner guilt and you thought that would be the most guilty thing you could do, is make sexual something sacred. Or they might say you were at the seminar with him and he was paying attention to you, so maybe it was sort of placed in your mind, oh, this guy's, I think he likes me, or I think he likes me like that. But anyway, that's all.
Well, if I had been with a scientist of the psyche, which is called psychologists or psychiatrists, they would have probably brought that up right away. Well, listen, do you think there might have been a part of you trying to tell yourself about this?
Yeah. But it's your belief though that this was from the spiritual world and it was a message to you.
My look at the world is that there is a spiritual side of all things, and that I don't even separate it necessarily from my physical world as much as just a part of an interpretation.
Sure.
And all that we do, what we're doing right now, is spiritual. You're talking, and I'm listening, and I'm getting what you're saying, and there's nothing here material that's going back and forth.
Yeah, sure.
You got people listening on YouTube. They're watching this stuff. There's nothing material that's happening here other than thoughts. Mm-hmm. Thoughts are spiritual things.
So continue your story from when you had that vision of naked John Roger.
Well, then again, that just got put in me. Mm-hmm. And then later, that's about another month later, Vincent and I went to the big summer festival. And at that point,
For this group.
and,
MSIA.
yes, right, and
Movement of Spiritual Inner
about
Awareness.
1,000 people showing up.
Wow. And what year was this?
This was 1977 now.
So the organization wasn't that old at this point.
Well, this was, I would say maybe 7 years of whatever.
So, I would say so. It's so impressive when I read this story at the beginning of the book, and he mentioned how John Rogers started the organization, we talked also about him being a plagiarizer, but he nonetheless started his own organization, and how it grew fast, and he got people to believe that he was special, and they gave him money.
Let's face it, he didn't have to sit and create anything. He stole the cosmology from Eckankar entirely, word for word.
Yep.
Set it up.
Eckankar being another...
Again, they're Minneapolis-based. That's their headquarters. They used to be in Las Vegas and Menlo Park.
Okay.
But they ripped off their tradition from northern India.
Yeah,
so
got it.
None of this is like... If you don't have to actually birth your own cosmology, pretty easy. You just rip it out and then claim you were the source.
Yeah, well, he was a good salesman, though, nonetheless, evidently.
Right.
Anyway, continue.
So anyway, this event, actually, the 77, it was, I forget where it was in Los Angeles, but it was, do you know Dave Mason? Remember the Mystic Traveler? He's the Unraveler. Really important rock song of that time. And he was actually singing for the event. And it was pretty amazing to have like number one rock man up there singing this guy's praises.
Yeah, it always helps to start an organization like this from Hollywood because, well, one, people in Hollywood, one might say they're susceptible to this kind of out there spirituality, but then also, or let's just say alternative spirituality, not the traditional, because they probably look down on traditional. Who knows? I don't want to judge, but it seems that a lot of these do originate in Southern California. But then, too, if you can get some celebrities on your side, which this
they're
book
very
gets
successful
into,
at that, right? As is Scientology. That's their whole point.
Then you have all that star power, and it lends credibility to it. Like, wow, if this person, whatever. But
cults are all about creating credibility by association. That is like a manic process for them to gather as many people around that they can stand next to give them credibility.
By the way, for viewers at home, I'm going to be checking questions throughout. So Chris has a question, and I'll be trying to blend these into the interview as well. So Chris asks, so are you or would you at this point in your life, I guess as you are now, equate Christianity or Catholicism as a cult?
Well, I would say there are two sides to Christianity. It can be practiced as a cult, or it can be practiced, in my view, as a science.
Okay. And when you say cult, again, you're not looking at it like evil or bad.
No, I'm saying you go to, say, if you're Catholic, you go to a cathedral.
Yeah.
And you have a person who is your teacher, leader, whatever, that does this Mass. The Mass is word for word spoken, used to be Latin, but they've tried. So there's this whole process by which you and the rest of the community gets elevated in some way together as a group, and you have an experience of some kind. The Eucharist is that. It's kind of like they look at it as transforming this material into substance that is spiritual.
I think people are going to have a tough time with your designating all
Of
religions
course
as a cult, because
you
cult has this. And in fact, I think even the definition anymore would label cult as something.
Well, let's just change it to dangerous cults and regular cults, because frankly, the word is an English word.
Yeah,
is
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the exact definition is. You might be right about that.
Oh, it is. It's clear. But at the same time, it's fine with me. I would say that there's a certain danger in any cult these days. If you are one who should not be just believing, and there's a part of us that is developing something that requires we step beyond these things and think for ourselves, if you will.
Yeah.
There's no intermediary needed, I guess is what I'm saying. And whenever you have a Catholic priest who stands there that says that they stand there between you and Christ, and then they sexually abuse you.
Well, obviously.
What is your path forward? What is your path forward? And I must say, that is the problem with cults. And I frankly have to ask myself sometimes do these cults, those kind of cults, even have the right to exist? Because what they're doing in practice is dissolving any child's capacity even to reach out to a spiritual base. They have been cut off from it.
Yeah, well, then that's sort of where you get into issues of, the medicine being worse than than the illness.
Oh, yeah,
So
well,
if
I
you call
think
cults an illness,
it is. I mean, in many respects, there are dangerous cults like
but
that.
if the medicine is to, make it illegal to have them, that medicine might be worse than the.
Well, I would say only if the law comes in and says, listen, this is happening so often, you have become a public nuisance. Then I would say you're at the point where you actually lose the right to have a cathedral down the street where you're taking people and treating them that way. I would say that becomes a social decision that has to be made when it becomes that dangerous. And I'm not saying all cults are dangerous. I mean, churches are very important, and religion is very important for people, especially being raised as a child. I look back at my missionary upbringing. There were so many things that I learned and I value to this day, gain this value. I'm not denigrating any of that.
Okay.
But I am saying that cults are cults, Cults are the process when, as a child, you look up with a natural sense of surrender to somebody who's going to take care of your spiritual life and handle it as if it's a holy thing. Then you have the other side of things where people misuse that.
Yeah.
Now, if it's done right, there's no problem. But I guess
just for clarification of language, I think it's my impression most people would say if you use people's need for spirituality and you nurture it in a healthy way, whether through a religion, then that's great.
Absolutely.
But when it's done inappropriately, then you begin to turn into a cult.
Right.
I think that's where the popular distinction lies. So people will take offense if you call Christianity a cult.
Well, I've just defined it the way they
thing.
can understand it, so they can get over it, I guess. Look, I was on my way to the seminary.
Yeah.
And so I was not a non-believer.
Yeah.
I had just given up I stayed with my brothers who were in medical school, and I decided not to do that. I'd done my MCATs and everything else. So it was important to me. The spiritual world was important, and it was to my father, who looked at the seminary as a far higher calling than medicine, But
we got another question here. Moose says, what was the point of this cult? What was the goal? So let's go back to MSIA. And,
so the Shabda Yoga path, let's go to the source, because these guys are just copying. Both Ekankar and John Roger just copied it. So there's a tradition in northern India, the Sikh tradition, where they actually practice mantric yoga, where they're given 5 names, which are 5 names of God that are used and practiced and meditated on they recommend about 2 hours a day. So you're basically tithing your time to do this. And what the goal is to find your connection to the word. Now, the word to them is the primordial sound from which all things are created.
Sound.
In Sanskrit, it's called nada. That is the primordial sound from which all things have been streamed into creation.
Is it like Om?
That would be
kind of thing?
Exactly. So you would find these sounds. They would use different ones. There were 5 names of God that they would give out to these people who are masters were incredibly good at making these things real.
Sure.
There was a guy named Julian Johnston who came out as a Baptist minister who himself got converted to the Sikh path.
Okay.
And he claimed that what they were practicing is what we have extant in the Gospel of St. John, where at the beginning it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. So that foundational sort of discussion in John, the Gospel, is what they were practicing.
Okay.
So Julian Johnston became a convert. Paul Twitchell ended up using his book called The Path of the Masters and copying things out of his book to create his own writings that became Ekankar.
And then that's where MSIA.
And John Roger was one of Paul Twitchell's students, he ripped off all that, and so he came with a pre-prepared religion. So he was just out, and I actually got connected to, I think there is a seed of truth in all that was being taught here, because the idea was you meditate and you find yourself in that stream of creative of wisdom, and you're able to travel on that sound current, as they say, and this requires a master that the Indian tradition has. That's why your master's there. They guide you inwardly up into the higher heavens. You get to this place where there's perfect positive, and then you don't have to reincarnate. That is a sort of Sikh tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Over here, when it gets translated into John Rogers, they take away the asceticism. They take away vegetarianism. They make it comfortable so John Roger can eat his steaks and, have his homosexual relationships or do whatever. And, he can still be the guru. It's just an accommodation to Western society.
So long story short, the purpose of MSIA was to achieve spiritual enlightenment,
right.
but done in a from the Sikhs.
For the Sikhs, who gave all the 5 names of God immediately.
Yeah.
John Roger had them broken out, so you had to work 2 years
in
for
that tradition. Then.
Right, but every time you paid a little bit more, and you end up buying your way into your heaven, I guess, in a way.
Got it. Okay. So let's go back to that concert. So in your story.
So then at the middle of this concert, it was quite an event.
And again, it's 1977.
1977.
You're watching an outdoor concert.
And Vincent and I, not an outdoors, inside at the San Gabriel Auditorium, and it was spectacular.
Mm-hmm.
And so Vincent and I, everybody was going out to get their lunch and stuff.
And for those who missed the audio in the beginning, Vincent
was my connection that got me into the movement originally, and through a guy named Michael Bookband, who gave me a light study and gave me Mark Harmach reading and basically dissolved any sort of
so by this point
side.
You've had this vision also. Right. You had the meditation. So so you're on your way. Like
I'm prepped.
Yeah, you buy it. You buy into
it. And now this little group at the Odd Fellows Hall where I first met John, there was probably 200 people.
Mm-hmm.
This is well over 1,000. Mm-hmm. Have this pop star up there singing and all the rest.
And who is the pop star again?
Dave Mason.
Dave Mason.
Get on. I mean, he's the Mystic Traveler. Go listen to Mystic Traveler.
Yeah, I'm always up to learn Mystic Traveler.
He had some other really great tunes too. Mm-hmm. The guy was fantastic. I knew him well before I got into this. So the fact that he was up there, I was like, my God, this is amazing. Vincent and I sat in the auditorium. It all emptied. And we were sitting there talking over the sort of event that had just happened so far. We're waiting. John Roger comes walking in and goes down all the way through the seats to talk to us, right? And he invited me at that point to come on a retreat that was happening right after this event up in Lake Arrowhead.
Where's that?
It's north of Los Angeles. You go, it's a little bit north.
Okay,
whatever,
Southern California.
About an hour ride from up in the mountains. It's a very beautiful place.
Yeah. And
they had property. The church had property up there, and there was a retreat. And obviously, it had been long since sold out. And so he said to talk to Polly McGarry, who was one of the staff members there, and she would arrange it. Mm-hmm. And by the time I did talk to Polly, I realized that this was like a huge thing that just happened because people were waiting in line and I'm being advanced to the front of the line. And so I ended up going up there to this retreat. And that retreat is, after hearing these seminars night after night, he then had invited me to join the staff. Now, what is staff? That means
you were brought up to the front of the line here.
Are you kidding? I mean, it's like I had no idea what was happening, nor did I even appreciate.
Do you think he did it now looking back because you're a handsome young man?
I have absolutely no doubt that this is just a process of preening. It's just absolutely. I mean, there were other staff members that were there, and I worshiped them. I said, wow, it would be amazing to do their work, getting to travel with this guy all the time, set up and do the audio and I just figured this would be my life, my dream.
Let's break this down. I mean, so at this point, I can clearly see how you at 23 or 4 would have been just completely taken in by this whole experience. What I want to break down is how John Roger got to this point. So we don't have to go through his childhood or anything like that, but he was always he was always a different kind of person. He taught high school, and according to the book, a principal walked in and he had the lights off and the students were all meditating or something like that. And the principal's like, well, "What are you doing?" He taught English, and so he was apparently quite interested in spiritual things. Apparently this happened after he was in a coma for 9 days or something like that.
He had a kidney operation, as he says. He went out, and he said that he went out of his body. And when he came back, he wasn't there anymore. Because his parents or something were there, and he called, and he didn't respond to Roger. And he said, "No, I'm John."
Okay.
And he
Roger was his birth name.
His birth name, Roger
Yeah.
Hinkins. And so now he became, after this event, this new spiritual being had
After the
entered
coma.
him. Right.
Yeah.
This new spiritual being had taken over his body named John.
Okay.
John the Beloved.
Got it.
Said,
Okay.
So that's how he came upon his spiritual.
And this was young adulthood. So then he became a teacher.
Well, he was already a teacher. This is after,
Okay.
I think actually, I don't know. I mean, the cynical part of me says he needed a segue from being a high school teacher to become a guru. And he'd already started these things with 3 of his high school. One was a teacher and another 2 were students of his, became managers in his church, and some are still there.
He was just. I mean, there are. It's one of these things where it's like, man, this computer hacker, he has so much talent. If he just would have used it for good instead of for robbing banks and breaking into systems, he wouldn't be in prison today. Da da da. It sounds like, man, if this John Roger guy would have somehow, because he was, I mean, he had just initiative, right? And reckless abandon, and he just went for things, and he had a lot of conviction about him being maybe delusional, I don't know, about him being special.
He was raised a Mormon.
He was raised a Mormon? Okay.
If you want to understand the cult side of things and where you go from there, you can actually study that and understand how a lot of things fit into place.
Sure,
And
but there's millions and millions of Mormons, and there's only one John Roger.
Right.
So
and the thing is, when you want to look at it and say, listen, I can't say that I did not get any value from that cult. I really did. There were so many things that in my life I'd say there was no other way to have this experience other than what I did. I mean, who else do you know has flown the Concorde twice? Yeah. Twice, not once, twice. It's like what he would do was create these sort of first-class operations, and he would travel around the world. So there was no other way he could have created a life other than creating himself as God. He decided to be God for his people.
He would then, be accused of all sorts of awful things: abuse, sexual abuse, theft, and all this.
Later,
but what I'm wondering is if from the outset, he didn't have these good intentions.
Well, the thing is, the picture that I used to meditate on when I was in Colorado, the first year before I actually was on staff with him, they recommended to get a picture. So I had gotten a poster picture of him, and. Is that the picture you have now? Yeah, you can take a look.
Yeah,
this is not the John Roger that most people would probably think of, but this is the one. This is the one that was on my wall that I would meditate on and try and create an image of.
This is the John Roger that you met.
Yeah,
he looked like this. Yeah. And so in this, he looks a bit more presentable. What's funny is, images of him later on, he looks quite weathered and just
look
overweight.
at me. I was very young at one time too. But
the
point
he looked like 10 years older than he really was. I mean, he looked like he didn't take care of himself anymore.
Well, yeah. I've often asked myself, did he go into this with good intentions, or was he conning people from the beginning?
Right, that's kind of the question.
It's a really difficult question. Yeah. And I, having lived and whatever next to him, there's a part of me that at least knowing him from the very beginning, when I first met him, that there were other people around him that had relationships with him that just seemed to match up, that this guy was for real.
Yeah.
But you have to understand, I was brainwashed.
Right.
Even looking back on it.
Yeah. Again, at your place at 24, you walk into this place, there's already an auditorium of people there, so it feels like this guy's for real, right? And then you have this image of him. I mean, it all adds up. But again, from the start, for him to walk up to the very first people and suggest, "Hey, I'm enlightened," or "I'm whatever."
He didn't do it first. He was actually giving his seminars for Paul Twitchell.
Oh, he was already. So that's kind of how it.
He was actually channeling Paul Twitchell.
Okay.
And then he went to Las Vegas after Paul Twitchell died.
Paul Twitchell, the leader of another.
Ekankar.
Okay.
Which is down here in Shakopee or whatever.
All right.
Here. So he goes up to Las Vegas where they're going to pass the mantle of the traveler consciousness.
I see.
Expecting full well he's going to be invited up and he's going to take the rose from Gail Twitchell. He wasn't chosen.
Yeah.
So he went off and just did his own thing.
Okay, so Chris is just chiming in with, there you have it, occult. You're meditating on an image of Rogers. Ah, yes, the serving man. So Chris is just pointing out that here you are having a human being as a god, and whatever. Which
But in the Indian
that's
tradition,
what
that
happens.
is the way they do it. I mean, that your
They
master,
have their guru.
the guru is the guy who stands there to lead you to God, and so,
So
you
you
really,
worship the guru.
you in a way you do. You honor them, and honestly, it becomes a holy thing. They become holy men, and there's nothing wrong to
Do they
me.
become godlike?
Well, what is it for a person who's not holy yet? When you look up to somebody with reverential awe, the way you did to your father and mother when you were little, if you quite honestly, they are gods to you when you're young. I mean, and that's what the difficulty of divorce is.
Yeah, right.
Two gods disappear, and you have the sky as rent for you. I mean, it's very difficult for a child to have the two most holy people in their life just suddenly separate. I mean, it's cataclysmic.
Right. But as an adult,
As an adult,
You
you'd
can-
expect you'd be able to have the maturity to be able to see something further. And that's all of this is about. Me at 23 not being mature enough to take the signals from the spiritual world that were clear evidentially, and I should have just interpreted them differently. But that's the whole point. These cults have ways of interpreting things. Go to Scientology. Go to any one of these. They control the interpretation.
sure.
And it's just the way how they work. And if you're going to buy their interpretation and not your own rational understanding, your critical thinking, they've got you. And that's the first thing to go in cults, critical thinking.
Yeah. Well, I think you have to abandon. I mean that goes for. I mean, if you're gonna believe in a spiritual world, you have to believe in the unbelievable, though.
Well, let's look at
It's
that
almost
prospect.
it's almost a requirement. I
Well,
think.
well, again,
Whether
let's-
it's a
let me be the
miracle-
counter one to you.
Yeah, go
on
ahead.
that.
Yeah.
I would suggest you, if you yourself were to say, okay, let's just pretend that a spiritual world exists. Take the most cynical human being, and take, for example, a statement that I've found to be true, that more than one miracle happens to you every day, and if you don't notice it, you're just not paying attention. No, live your life as if that is true for a week, 2 weeks, and find out if it's not so. Then ask yourself, well, how do I attribute those miracles? Those miracles will guide you to certain understandings about what it is you've been missing all your life in order to have your cynical view of things. I'm not in any way a cynic when it comes to actual spirit. I mean, it is a proven thing to me. I was told one time that a guy had told me that said, nobody can meditate on the first 14 verses of the Gospel of St. John every day for a year and not have their entire life transformed. I said, okay, there's science for you. Okay, take that
Yeah, there's your
theory,
experiment.
right?
Yeah.
Go for it. I suggest you do it. See what happens in a year. It's shocking.
Personally, you do believe that in that.
It has been proven to me. It has been proven to me. I mean,
You did this after you left the cult.
Yes.
Yeah. So
And there's
are you a Christian man today?
I would say I don't. The Christianity I practice is something far more. It's not a church Christianity at all.
Sure.
It has to do with the fact that I can go in and mock up a picture of John Roger and have him appear to me. That is the sort of Christianity. That is the living presence of this being that we call Christ. And that, to me, it is somebody who he is there whenever you need. Here, at this interview, anywhere. But again, it's not something you have to believe. It has to be something that you have to come to through an experience. And once that experience is there, it's unshakable.
I agree with that, but I don't know if people have to have an experience. I think the idea of believing in the unbelievable has comfort in people.
Absolutely, and there's nothing
You
that
can
is.
rely on that. It's I don't know. It's something tangible.
Okay.
Maybe there's more. Maybe there's even more temptation to follow a man like John Roger than there is to accept Christ as your Savior, because you can see John Roger. He's right here,
Right.
and maybe there's.
That was a part of his con. When he first met me and I had a chance to talk with him, he said, Victor, you feel that? Functional reality. We don't deal in faith. We deal with functional reality. That was what he said.
And would he look at you like that? Was he that?
Exactly just like that.
Yeah.
And I never forgot that impression of this functional. It's like, okay, that is what I'm going to be to you as God. That was what he's saying. All he needed from me is complete surrender, and I gave him that for a long period of my life before I found out this is just like totally screwed up.
Okay, well, let's go back to in the mountains of Southern California, and he offers you a staff position in the church?
Right.
Okay.
And so I took it. And, frankly, it required the cult work involved a lot of just taking care of John Roger, for one thing. But there were services that they provided to the church members that had to do with aura balancing, polarity balancing, interphasings.
So you were trained on all this?
Trained on this stuff, right?
Yeah.
The aura balance is a very interesting one. You just use a crystal and a chain, and you would cleanse people's auras. And the third aura balancing had to do with a conversational process, which was very much like confession. Like if you would come in, you'd be lying on a table, and I'd be doing my crystal above you, and over this center here, which is the chakras. If there's ever a time you did something or created something that you didn't feel good about, what comes to mind? And you're supposed to just say whatever comes to mind. I'm sorry, this was, if you ever felt disappointed or let down over this chakras, if you've ever had a time where you saw something that disturbed you, what comes to mind? And you'd say something. And I would find out over the course of doing this for 10 years that whenever it came to this chakra, 99% of the time, people were dealing with helplessness. When you see something that is tragic, the judgment comes, I should be able to do something here. They can't. So the judgment is, I'm not enough, or whatever else. And all the things, all those levels, they were incredibly good for uncovering things in people's. So those kind of services.
These are the spiritual experiences people are having.
Exactly. So when people came in and got these services, they came back year after year because they were very powerful for them. I mean, one of the things I learned.
And would they pay for them? Is this?
They would pay, I think it was $70 people would pay for an hour.
Okay. Okay.
And there were the inner core, the 5 people, the men that were kind of hanging around. And here, let's just go over this inner core of staff members who are all young men, wholesome, all non-homosexual, but all have turned. Why would John Roger just go with homosexual men? Why would he?
You said they were not homosexual?
They were not.
But they turned?
Yeah. And I would even say they weren't even turned. But why would he go with this instead of just collecting any number of the homosexuals?
I don't know.
I'll tell you why.
Okay, go for it.
It has nothing to do with sex. It has to do with control.
Yeah.
It has to do with absolute, and what more control can you exercise over another human being than to change their sexual orientation? I would be driving his limousine around, and he would say, well, there's Michael so-and-so. He's gay, but he doesn't know it yet. I thought to myself, God, how do people not know they're gay or not?
So from the start, he was known to be a gay man, John Roger?
John Roger was a closet gay. He would absolutely, if you want to know, in my view, who John Roger was, do you ever see the movie Brokeback Mountain?
Yeah, I have.
Remember the scene where the man walks down into the gully, this guy has been killed. He's got 2 boys on either side. He's going down to show them what will happen when and if they become gay. Very powerful moment. John Roger was one of those little boys, in my view. And he had gotten a very strong sense in Rains, Utah, that doesn't even exist anymore, that, whatever his natural proclivities were absolutely demonic and to be absolutely put away. So he was sick in that way. But he found, in my view, again, these are just my points of view, he found a way he could then control himself and control others, and made a spiritual practice of manipulating people this way.
So you were part of this group of young, handsome ministers.
And the lie, and let's talk about the lie, because all of these kind of cults, the destructive cults, are built on lies. We, the staff members, were this wholesome set of young men who people looked up to. And why their image of us is that we were all celibate, because that's what they were told.
Okay.
So we traveled with this man. We were all this holy. We were like 6 of the 12 disciples, if you will.
Yeah.
I just know what my view of them, when I hadn't even gotten in yet, I looked at these guys and, my God, look at this. I mean, how could you, these perfect being right next to the traveler. I mean, it was like holiness. But people didn't know that there's kind of a sexual slavery going on in the center of it. This is like, what's his name, who just got hung in the New York jail. It's just like that. Only you've got a spiritual guru that is preening these people to be able to serve them. It's sick.
So outside of that, well, you're flying all over the country, the world, even as in this
We
position.
traveled first class. We had vows of poverty, but we had a travel agency that just catered to us. In fact, the church owned a travel agency, and anybody that he wanted to travel would be given these travel agency cards. So then the hotels would give us all our rooms at half price. We traveled at discount rates. I mean, who else? I mean, we as staff members left Charles de Gaulle Airport at 9:42 one morning and landed in New York at 5:42 the same morning. That's how we traveled.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's supersonic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an amazing thing to be in the Concorde.
Yeah.
But I had no money. I wasn't able to travel anywhere unless I was given authorization to do so. When I left the movement, I had nothing.
And what were you doing all over the world?
Again, we had people. We would do insight seminars in London.
Okay.
And I would go to South America. The church was growing. Australia was growing all over the place with this secular recruiting arm, which was the personal growth seminar that we had stolen from LifeSpring. Word for word. In fact, we took one of the LifeSpring trainers, Russell Bishop, and John Rogers pulled him over. He was one of JR's ministers.
Yeah.
So we just duplicated
Yeah.
LifeSpring, called it Insight, and then we changed a few things.
So the church, the MSIA took the trainings from another group and turned it into what they called Insight, and then they took their religious practices from another group and turned it into their own.
Right, and all these aura balances were stolen from another group.
Yeah,
absolutely,
just rebranding
just called.
same kind of thing.
He is a walking Xerox machine. Everything that works, he would collect it, then claimed he had came up with it. But incidentally, you should be. MSIA is very hard to say. They had originally called it Messiah, which should have been my first clue.
Yeah.
But, they stopped doing that when the cult thing came up around the LA Times started to do the expose. Then they decided that it wasn't good to call it
Inside once you were one of the staff, then it was traveling around first class and doing these seminars and that was your life. Like, what if you wanted to go home for a holiday or something like that?
I didn't see my folks for 8 years.
Oh, no kidding.
I wouldn't even think of putting my parents in front of my work. I was like, the thing is with JR is that if you don't, I was doing a seminar in Israel, conducting one of these seminars, and I had a telegram from my mother saying that my father was dying, I need to get back home. And so I told JR, I said, we got the rest of the staff, they can do this. I'd like to go back home. And my ministry is there. His response is, well, you can go, but you're putting personal things in the way of the work, and you won't be returning. I thought to myself, well, I mean, I know I'm not going to fly back here. It's pretty expensive to come back. No, he says, to staff. So he's going to fire me from my staff position because I was going to go home to be with my father, who was dying. Even I woke up at that point. This is after 9 years of being with this guy, working with him, loving, trusting, everything else just completely. I figured, this isn't right.
What did you do?
I went and got a ticket and flew back to my father's, stayed with him for 10 days. He was mostly comatose. And I read a book called Life Between Death and Rebirth by Rudolf Steiner, a series of lectures. Because when I was watching my dad die, I thought to myself, okay, what's going to happen to him? What is the experience when a person dies? And I must say, I looked at the entire experience of my missionary upbringing and everything I had learned from John Roger in the 10 years. There was nothing. I mean, what do you know? What do you know about what's going to happen when you die?
Well, I would say if you grew up in the mission, you believe you're going to heaven.
Okay, but what is that? I mean, even that. What's your mental image of that?
In the Christian faith, it's paradise. You probably have your body back, and you're just enjoying being with lost loved ones, and you have no needs because, like food or anything, because you're perfect or you're. It doesn't get too specific, I guess, as far as what you do with your time.
Because there's nothing in the Bible that makes it specific. So it's like you're given nothing, basically. This is the part of faith when it really comes down to it.
Mm-hmm.
When you die, you better have it. Because frankly, you aren't given any notice about, okay, at this point you stop breathing, and all of a sudden you don't have any answer to that. And this book, The Life Between Death and Rebirth, this series of lectures, was kind of like the Tibetan Book of the Dead, only with modernized.
Mm-hmm.
So at the point you take your legs, you end up expanding out, and the entire process is described about what time, by the time you leave, you die, to the time you incarnate again.
So you read these to your father.
My father's sitting there dying for these 10 days. I was the night shift because I was on Israel time anyway. My mother was a nurse, but she was taking Dad during the daytime, and we both watched him die. When John Roger came around, having flown back from Israel with the rest of the staff, and they came through Minneapolis to do these services, right? I wasn't doing them. But he had clearly had a olive branch out, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I learned what I had to learn, I guess. At this point, I was extremely valuable to the organization. I was doing seminars for free, mind you. I calculated that the seminars I conducted in the last year I was with the movement and with Insight brought in $750,000,
Mm-hmm.
for which I was paid zero. Now, admittedly, it was expensive. They flew me around and stuff. You know, I had to be fed.
Yeah.
But when I met with John Roger in Minneapolis and told him I wasn't going to come back, suddenly he turned.
Yeah.
The rest of the staff members, and there's a whole crew then because they were returning from Israel. There must have been 10, 12 people. He said, well, Victor, if you can't understand for me what's going on, why don't you listen to your colleagues? I had to listen as each of these are my closest friends. These are the people I'm back to back with for 10 years of my life.
Mm-hmm.
But these people are people who see a vacuum is taking place right next to John Roger, and their job is to take me down in a sufficient fashion that he would actually respect them and their loyalty. It's like Trump.
That's expected?
That is like Trump. I mean, when I see this happening politically, it nauseates me because I see the same thing that happened to me. And they went through and chewed me to pieces. I left. They
chewed you to pieces for leaving, or because you're an ex-member?
Well, they used it. No, I wasn't an ex-member yet.
I thought they wanted you to leave though, so they could have your spot.
Well, no, it's nothing quite so obvious as that. It's just like they would never admit to themselves that they actually were lusting after my spot, or were envious enough to want it. They're only. Actually, I was probably at that time one person away from the one guy who's to be the next traveler. So I was up there.
Wow. But there was no salary paid to any one of you guys?
No, we had vows of poverty. Like I said, there was zero money. So then they began to take my wallet, my Hue ring, everything I was wearing.
You mean off your body?
Off my body. And I left, as I recall.
Tell me, let's go back to this. Where was this held? Where did this happen? In your home?
In the Marriott, downtown Minneapolis. That's where they were staying.
In the lobby or what?
No, they had taken this big suite upstairs.
Okay, so that's where this.
So this whole thing took place in a room that was about a little bit bigger than this.
Yeah.
And they were just circled around, and they just.
And are they all wearing suits? Was it that kind of
organization?
Well,
I mean, it was more casual because they were between.
Okay.
This was like probably the day they were traveling, and I've just told them, no, I'm not going back.
Yeah.
And that is like a shock repercussion. That is like nothing else in the movement. When you take one of his leading staff members and he says he's not returning, it's like, that's a serious enema to a cult, let me tell you. I mean, it is like seriously, that's like when people around here run down and buy up all of Costco's toilet paper. I mean, it becomes a shock like this.
So what were they saying to you? Why were they chewing you out?
Well, it wasn't, it's like this. They have to show to John Roger how loyal they are. And by being loyal to him, they have to perceive in me the defects that are making me not make the right choice now.
Okay.
So that's the attitude that they're going about this. That's surgically going in there. But they have permission now, because John Rogers has given up on me, to do whatever surgery they want, mentally, emotionally, or whatever. I knew that there was no limit. That's when at that point, you're pretty much dissolved in tears, waiting for the last person to get done so you can take your departure. You know, as I remember, I had to borrow money to get my mother's car to the parking lot.
Did you know at that point, like, were they trying to get you back, or was it a?
Well, John Roger had given up on me that point.
Okay, so then
So
this was the farewell.
This is the farewell, if you will. Yeah, that's the farewell. That is what you get after 9 years of working with a cult and decide you want to take another step in a different direction. Just don't do it.
All right, we're going to talk more about that in a second. Let's. Can you tell a little bit more about the experience being in that inner circle? Now, you talked about these men all being straight, but turned homosexual or engaging in homosexual acts. I mean, was that? Get into as much or little detail or.
Well, I'll just stay with what my experience is, because I don't know. Quite honestly, there were up to 5, 6 of us at any one time. Low points, 4 of us that were really on the inner core.
Yeah.
And our job was to take care of John Roger and do whatever he needed and whatever else. And at night, the mythology was that he was ruling the universe and keeping the evil away, stuff like this. He supposedly didn't sleep.
Mm-hmm.
But, anybody who was in his bedroom all night, he was sleeping, snoring like the rest of us. But, you made up stories about this. But your job was to make sure he would have aches and pains. You end up massaging him endlessly, and he'd spend interminable hours with blackout curtains in his room and his king size bed that was all whatever, and he would watch Turner Broadcasting, everything. I've never seen so many movies in my life as I did with him. He was like, yeah, that's all he did. It was just like veg. He would literally.
And he just wanted you there to hang out with him.
Yeah, hang out, and he would then.
Were you all there with him?
No, just one at a time.
Time.
I mean, during the daytimes there was business that went on.
Yeah.
We did our business together, but then you would be the one to be able to watch him do the night watch, and he would exchange. It was like, I didn't know. I was so naive that I thought I was the only one that he was having sex with. I mean, that's how. I mean, you got to realize that this is like, and when it first sensorially came into my awareness that he was having sex with somebody else, was in the middle of an insight seminar I was conducting at Universal Studios in Los Angeles. And he was sitting in the back tables with one of the church attorneys. For those who may have been in the group, it wasn't Ken Meyer, so that'll target who it was. I went up to meditate on a break in my room, and I heard John Rogers' room open. It was like a door between us, but I knew he was in there. And I figured, well, he's got this other guy with him who's the attorney. And all of a sudden I hear these audible sounds of what's going on over there. And I mean, I could not take that away. I mean, there's no way to not hear that anymore. That was the first awakening, the fact that this was not.
Why? Because it broke your heart?
John Roger had stated, I had broken every rule of every fiber of every piece of my being. I mean, the act of sex with this man was so repulsive that it was something I could not. I mean, of course I judged myself for not being loving enough to be whatever with this man. And there were times when I would actually get through it and stuff like this. But when he told me that this is something that only I had with him,
mm-hmm.
I figured, well, this is, I guess, one of the highest blessings. How can I be so evil as to be not appreciating it? So, I'm struggling soulfully.
Would you feel guilty for not enjoying it?
Exactly. Then? Precisely. Exactly right. How could I ever be in a place not to be just utterly grateful for being and having this experience?
How was that initiated?
Well, that's hard because, again, I was a slow learner. I mean, some of the other staff members had told me that they weren't as naive as I was, but it took me about a year to really wake up to that this was going to actually have to happen. Because I was all the time thinking, I was still in that original programming that says, this is my evilness. Why should I bring this in even to my thoughts? But after arriving around with him and him saying, well, there's Michael, he's gay, but he doesn't know it yet. There's a part of me that starts to question, well, how is it possible not to know you're gay?
Yeah.
And then but the other question is, well, maybe I don't know, which is the whole reason he's implanting these doubts is a part of his process of trying to corral
But,
me.
like, what was the first experience like? Like, did he get you drunk or something?
No,
or what?
no. He didn't. I mean, he fired me every day practically. The people he would take me down and debase me in front of hundreds, thousands of people. Hey, I was his whipping boy. And he literally would fire me probably every week. And I would try and figure out how it was that I was not measuring up.
So you just were under constant.
I mean, it was psychological torture. And it was to the point where I was out at Chart House out in Malibu, right on Highway 1 there. And I was in there, and it's a scary thing. I mean, I never had drug experience that as bad as this one. Where I got into this mental thing. I was sitting there with him, had driven his Lincoln Continental, and I got into this thing that said he can think, he knows everything I'm thinking. And I got into this negative thing. He said, I can't think that. I can't think that. I mean, I got to a point of psychosis, literally, that when I walked out of there and I got into the car, I couldn't drive. I didn't know the judgment when I was leaving and trying to merge on Highway 1. I mean, I didn't know how far these cars were away from each other. I was literally in an altered state that was really so dark, I cannot tell you. It was dark, dark, dark beyond anything I'd ever had.
I'm just imagining you are stripped of all self-worth, of all.
It was a hell. It was like a physiological thing, though. I mean, I look back and say, how can you even induce that in a human being? But that's the psychological strain I was under because of this. Well, anyway, so at some point, he's fired me, and this time he actually has decided I'm going to go down and stay at Prana, which is the ashram in Los Angeles. And to everybody else, they're begging to get in there. And for me, being on staff, it would be like hell. This is the Christmas before. He had taken the rest of the staff members and gone to Australia with them, and he left me in LA all alone at the house. He says, I'm not going to take my pain with me, is what he said. So I spent the entire Christmas.
This is just like being raised in an abusive household.
You got it.
But you were
It is an abusive
relation.
Cults are abusive relationships. This, if you want to look at Scientology, and people are complaining about Miscavige, he's doing exactly the same thing. I mean, people have to understand there is a mind manipulation that is so deep and so profound.
Yeah.
You're taking what is most holy and the striving of a human being and perverting it and basically inverting it in a very sick way. It's a sick thing to do. But anyway, so get to the point. He then had come back, and I had worked so hard for this entire 2-week period while we were down in Australia. And I had to. He said, if you don't figure it out by the time you get back, we're going to be sending you to Prana. And I was scared shitless. I spent Christmas. It was hell. So I went to pick him up at the airport. Mm-hmm. I put on this brightest sort of, I've got it, JR. I figured it out. And the part of me inside was saying, I don't know what the fuck is happening. It was just, this is the point. And then I greeted him, and I just knew in that moment, he knew that I wasn't there, whatever there was. He knew he could see it, and I just crashed. Well, anyway, he told the staff at this point, I knew he was serious because he said, okay, we're going to have Paulie do this and that. He was actually taking measures and making it step-by-step process. Edgar Veitia was the successor to the Travelers in the room at the time. And I just begged. I said, what do I need to do?
Wow, yeah, that is
I was
just
on my knees.
Yeah.
He had this sort of
begging your abuser.
Begging my abuser. And Edgar shut the door. He had walked out. And there's some part of me that said, I haven't tried this. And I just put my head in his lap. And then the next thing I know is that was involved. But I must say, as horrible as it was in terms of physically, after the act was done, everything turned around. Everything. I could do no wrong, never be fired again. Doors were open. I was suddenly the most pristine, most whatever. It was like, I cannot tell you, it was like a year of agony just went away. And it's like, I was thinking to myself, how the fuck did I not realize how to do this sooner? That was the attitude I had.
Because it was so relieving.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, anyway.
It took extraordinary circumstances then for even that to happen. It wasn't like he
I tell you this.
really tried to manipulate the circumstances so that it, he wasn't like getting you, like I said, getting you drunk or
No, I
drugging
mean,
you
he
or
had been
anything.
drugging me all year long, though. I mean, what's the process of this lifting you up and throwing you down, lifting you up, and then
emotionally,
in front of 1,000 people saying, I have.
You think
the,
he had sex in mind? Like, this is all going to lead to that?
I'm sure he did. I'm sure this was all a process of corralling me to the point I had no choice. And so that he could say, I did it out of my choice. He didn't make me do it.
Yeah.
I begged him for it. Yeah, well, it's a thing, but it happens all the time. I mean, but you have to
I wonder if people who work with unhealthy domestic partnerships or, battered wives or whatever they say, if they see the parallels between the two, because it strikes me as similar.
Anytime you've got control in a relationship that is violent like this, and I don't consider this a sexual relationship, I consider it a violent relationship. Mm-hmm. It's an exercise of violence. And that's the thing, that when you try and recover from it later, you have to really look deep and say what part of yourself was so, how dark a place you had to go to your own self-worth, like you said.
And it ended with that session in the hotel with with all your brothers.
But again, my entire world was the movement by that time.
Yeah.
I had done wonderful things. I had stood in front of thousands of people, and I could never have done that before. John Roger actually had built something in me, and a place where I was actually achieving goals that I could probably never have achieved otherwise. I mean, I don't know how I could have gotten there otherwise. But who else is going to be willing to take that kind of...
I'm sure there are other paths too.
It wasn't mine. My path was this.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. When I met Peter, I was doing his insight. Now, mind you, Peter was gay before he met me. Mm. That's a joke. But the idea
you
that
didn't turn
Peter,
him gay, in other words. Right.
Peter hit on me the first day he met me when we were doing the first seminar thing, and he was incredibly smart, intelligent, funny, and to see what happened to him in this group, a guy who could do New York Times bestsellers without this stuff, and he came in. I mean, he was reduced.
When he came in, the group was pretty well established. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you were already involved, and it was already big enough there when you got involved. Well, let's. Now I want to hear about how you picked yourself up, how you put the pieces back together. After you said, I'm leaving, you didn't want me to see my dad on his deathbed.
I didn't
that
say
was the
that.
last straw. But that was the last straw, right? You said?
And so I just closed the door on it. And I remember at some point, I think I even was at the airport when he left.
And what year was this?
This was 1985, April or so.
Okay.
And
you were about...
And I asked...
How old were you?
I was 32, I think.
Okay.
So I asked him, I said, well, what about my ordination? He says, once you've been ordained, you're always a minister. This is at the airport.
Oh, really? So he didn't...
Yep.
It strikes me as a very peculiar man.
Very peculiar,
you think
because
he would have held a resentment and said nothing. You get nothing.
I think he was trying to figure out his next step, because I think that he had realized he had pushed me too far. And I think he may have realized his error, that all he would have had to do in Israel is say, absolutely, let's get a ticket and send you over there.
Sure.
But he didn't. And he pushed it all this way, and he realized he had lost somebody who was earning probably $250,000, almost $1 million for him every year. It's like, that's what was what he was looking at that point. I said, what about my initiation? Because I hadn't gotten soul initiation. Soul is when you really know that you know that you know.
So you still wanted to retain this?
Yeah. I was not cutting away. Honestly, I've just figured I've got to sort my life out.
Okay.
And I had told myself, you could go up to the mental and etheric initiation, but at the point you take the soul initiation, that means you know that you know that you know. In other words, you have no more doubts about this path. And I said, I will not take that initiation unless I know this true. So I said, well, what about my initiations? And the only one left for me was soul. He said, well, I could give you a soul initiation now, and you can be on your way. And it's like freaking just like taking a little gift out of a Cracker Jacks box. This is what I'd worked all these years for. I can give you that. be on your way. It's like, no, I don't want it.
Oh, you just didn't see the value in it anymore.
I mean, it felt like an insult. I mean, I was kind of asking.
It sounds like he was leaving on good terms, though, in his way.
Well, he was trying to, I think.
Yeah.
But I think by the time I had to go back out to L.A. to get my things, which is a whole nother story. But on the way back, I stopped off at Rajneeshpuram, which is the Rajneesh was almost. He was about having his last event there in Rajneesh, Oregon, before he gets deep.
No way. You were close
up
with
there.
that?
I just
saw that Wild Wild West, right? That
yeah.
documentary.
Well, I actually happened. I'd gone to L.A., picked up my things, and Jared had given me one of the church cars. It was an Oldsmobile, convertible. And he said, I said, I'll sell it for you when I get to Minneapolis and send you the money. That was the agreement. Put the little stuff I had and drove north. And on the way, I was looking for a place to stay overnight in Oregon. I just happened to be going through Rajneeshpuram. Well, it's a spiritual group. I'm sure they have a place.
Oh my gosh!
I drove up there. I thought it was going to be like a mile or two up the road. Like 30 miles into the countryside, I finally get to this place. And I get left off at this, visiting center. They go out and get drug dogs and smell through my entire car.
Were they all dressed in the orange red?
I'm the only one with jeans on and stuff. And they start asking me questions. And I said,
you just have a attraction to cults.
Oh, well, this is it. I mean, this was the most amazing experience. Over one night, I learned so many things about Rajneeshpuram. It's like unbelievable. The guy who took me on the tour around he was an architect trained at Harvard. He was a bus driver. And then these two young girls get on a bus behind me, and they were going, well, where are you worshiping? She said to the other one. I said, where are you worshiping? Well, I'm worshiping up at the garage today. So their work was their worship, And listening to this stuff and saying, well, this is just like a whole different amazing process.
Get people.
I went in, part of the tour had to do with the garage. You go in there, white floors. There's not a speck of grease anywhere. Went to the first crematorium. There was outdoor crematorium ever in Oregon's history. And we had all the food I could eat, but it was milk that actually never saw air from the time it left the teat of a cow all the way to the cafeteria where you push it down. That milk had not touched air because otherwise they would have had to have gone through some homogenization. Stuff like that.
Yeah,
and so this was my one day, and then I waited long enough for Rajneesh to drive by the next day with his limousines and all the noise and everybody people, and I was done. But yeah, I had come, it just happened.
And you thought that was a sight?
Yeah, I mean, it's like...
You were involved in a cult, and you went there, and you thought, whoa.
Yeah.
But they were just so showy about it, right? They all wore red and orange, and that's a heck of a story. And how the locals were just like, oh my gosh, and they took over the city council of this little town.
I've never seen that movie. I've heard Wild Wild West.
To me, I mean, I thought it was amazing.
My brother saw it. He said, Victor, you got to watch this. I haven't done Netflix forever. So.
Well, shoot, you probably had met the people who were there on the screen. Thank you, Gabe. Yeah,
that's me. That was among.
That was
probably the last year. I mean, they had tents. They must have had 3,000 tents on the hillsides around when I came.
Yeah,
it was just unbelievable. Oh, I didn't tell you. So I asked them. I said, "Well, where can I have a place to stay?" They said, "We have a Rajneesh hotel." I said, "How much is?" He said, $300 a night. I said, "Excuse me."
In the 80s, wow, that was a lot.
Well, they said that their big event was happening. He said, "I'm lucky I have a place for you." I didn't have $300. I said, "Well, what can I do?" And he said, "Well, we have this place called University Heights. There you can pay $60. We'll give you all the food you can eat and a tour tomorrow."
Oh.
I gladly took that.
Well, yeah.
And that's how I got a chance to experience this before that happened.
And you were there just the day?
Just a day.
And then where did you go after that? Where were you going?
I was on my way back to Minneapolis.
Oh, that's a heck of a detour.
Yeah. Well, actually, I was going north. I was going to go up to Washington to stay with my brother.
Oh, okay.
And that's probably what I did.
I see.
Navy up in Washington. So.
Yeah, that is a very well-made documentary. I really recommend it. All the themes about, because the people in that small town were accused of being, you just don't like us because we're outsiders, So you compare it to but it was like put on its head, where the outsiders, no, they really were a threat, right? They really did take over the city council. They poisoned the residents of the town eventually, so that they couldn't go and vote or something like that. But like it puts themes of xenophobia and flips it on its. I love how it flips it, where it's like, well, they had reason to be afraid of these outsiders, whereas that kind of goes against the socially accepted script of embracing diversity and this and that, and so it's fascinating. It's
Well, he did have, and JR had his death threats, and there was a time when I was tested in my loyalty because Michael Fader, who was sort of his, sort of like his bodyguard by this time, he ended up. We all decided we had to have fat jackets. We had bulletproof vests.
wow.
And they were suggesting we learn how to handle handguns. I said, sorry.
Oh,
There's no way I'm going to do that. I was considered to be absolutely the person that was off the, not having sufficient loyalty on staff to
For
actually
not-
put my body in the place. I throw my body in front of them, but I'm not going to kill somebody,
did the other guy, were they armed?
I think one of them was.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is a weird thing where you have to go into that zone where when the Rajneesh people, I mean, they had turrets on the way in when I was driving in. There were turrets stuck up there and people's up there with guns.
Let's look at this clip on CNN because it kind of wraps things up here, where you call in, or you have your fiance at the time call in to Larry King while John Roger and the author of this book, who at the time was very involved in the organization, are being interviewed by Larry King. So like these guys, it got to the top of the top, and we mentioned some celebrities who were involved, like Ariana Huffington was a big member in this group, and
She needs a chapter. I come back and we could have a whole session on her. But
yeah.
the thing here is that after I had left, the LA Times had come to me and asked if it was 2 years after I'd left, they asked if I would talk about the inside stuff, and I agreed to. They said if we can't print it unless somebody's willing to talk about it.
Yeah.
So I did, and that's a story in itself. That happening then really rocked the church. Peter then came back into the church after his computer days. He'd gotten his bestseller, and he started to give JR back his media platform. This is one of those examples that.
And you saw it as an opportunity to challenge them or call
Exactly.
them out
So
or whatever?
when he would show up at the Tom Schneider show, I would call in and ask these really embarrassing questions and stuff. And he was calling me, Peter was, and saying, listen, if you do that again, I'm going to come after you. I mean, he was threatening me. Then this one was like the coup, the final coup. Now, I don't know which one this is.
I think this is the one where the woman calls in and accuses them of all that stuff.
Right.
Gabe, go ahead and play that, would you?
Yep. Good evening. Thank you for having me on.
Sure.
John Roger, how can we investigate the accusations made against you by your former staff members who accuse you of sexual abuse, death threats, bomb scares, and beatings when you avoid open discussion of these issues and replace such discussion with telling us to rely on your own inner experience, on our own inner experiences?
Other than that, you're crazy about him. How do you do it? Well, how did all this start about you?
People come in. See, it's like if you're a big corporation, you're Larry King, I come to work for you.
So you see some things he's up to there where he's...
So I do that, you hire me. Then I start to want you to change and do things my way. And you say, no, I won't do that. And I say, well, then you're brainwashing me, and I leave, and then I say bad things about you.
So this is disgruntled.
Oh, yeah.
Four disgruntled former employees, basically.
Yeah, 4 disgruntled employees who were his inner core.
Guys like you. So they started to sort of chip away. They started to kind
I
of
was
go away after you?
Yeah. I mean, I was actually, there were 3 that had left prior to me. I'm doing damage control on the inside. And this is not a moment that I really am proud of myself for, because I am now doing the things that the worst part of a cult is, which is lying to the membership and not answering their questions straight. I would do.
It's all...
And that's why I do things like this, because for those people who still are involved, and many are, as a result of me, I got Peter and I got thousands of people into this group. Some left, but when I left.
Well, I hope you don't... You already left that group with so much emptiness, right? Having had your esteem just completely stripped away, and now you've got guilt for getting people into there. I mean, I just imagine the emotional toil.
Well, let's just look at the reality. I was given a place incredible power. I lied.
Yeah.
I lied about this guy being close to God. I brought a lot of people in. I remember one guy who was a colonel in the Australian Army asking me, he said, listen, I'm counting on you. I am a Christian and my reputation depends on this. Is this really a Christian path? He came to me because I was a missionary kid. I should be able to know and be able to. And I gave him all the confidence. He died the same day my father did. And I feel like I totally let that man down. Now, when you're in a position as I was to have seen that what I had seen, these people had the right to ask questions, as they did, in those sort of confessions. Well, what's really going on? And instead of evading those, I should have said, what they've said is true. The three who had left before me were simply telling the truth.
Yeah.
They were having their lives threatened, acid poured over their cars, tires slashed. They had to go into hiding. And I'm on the inside trying not to see this. So, I mean, the reason I do this is because I feel in a way I get to buy back a little bit of my integrity for always telling the truth and unreservedly so. And so this is where Peter was. He was trying to do damage control the same way I was. And he lived to regret doing this.
Yeah, and then he would later write this book.
Which is something that, people could get a hold of. Even though that they've bought this book, they bought the rights for $2 million, so Peter wouldn't be able to tell the stories here. It's not available commercially, but
Well, secondhand copies are probably out there on eBay or
well, I got brand new ones. If people are interested, they can contact you.
Get a hold of the show if you are interested in one of these books. It's an interesting read for sure, because I mean these kinds of stories are just kind of mind-boggling. And the guy has a sense of humor. He was a good writer. He was already an author at this point. Well, you were interested in tying, when I asked you to be on the show, you're like, I want to tie this into what we see today out there in the world.
Look,
so maybe let's wrap up by you just giving a minute on that. Well,
I would look at it. I would say that I would categorize myself and the people
cool.
in the cult as people of the lie. Okay. Now, when I say people of the lie, I mean it in the way that M. Scott Peck has a book called The People of the Lie, and I recommend everybody read it, especially now. We're being asked to choose between two people for the president, both people of the lie, in my view. We have one person who happens to have been the most authentic, true to his word, the one person who's actually a righteous human being that actually tells it as it is, and somehow he's unelectable. I have a concern when our entire country has now two political parties that are cults. They are cults. Mm-hmm. Observe what happens when there's an impeachment and how everybody lines up in one way. And it's like they see everybody has the evidence in front of their freaking eyes, and they still play the party game. It's a cult. It is what a cult does. So
I guess it's sort of like how a terrorist in an army, and the difference is the terrorist is, the bad guys.
Exactly.
And it's like if a cult's, in other words, or like, so if a cult is big enough to run a country, then it's no longer a cult, because it's. Yeah.
Well, we're in a and I think what we're this thing we're facing now with COVID, with this virus that has shut us down, and it seems to have stripped away the veneer, so everybody can see clearly how this entire thing is rigged, how many lies have upheld this economy, how many people are being stripped of their dignity, of their humanity. If these kind of bailouts had been given out to the little guy for the last 30 years, where would we be now? And we're paying a lot more and they want to give all the money to the corporations. Why? We are in the United States a people of the lie. We can turn it around, but we can't live in a cult like we are. I mean, it literally is a cult now. Seriously, I'm sorry.
Pulling back the curtain of MSIA, MSIA, and a handful of people in the know are exposed. You pull back the curtain on an economy of an entire huge country, it's a bit more epic.
And
but
it's painful.
But you see the parallels there, nonetheless.
People are dying.
Yeah.
And all I have to say is, I had no idea I was being trained to be able to recognize this thing, but not in a small level I was in. But now we're gone global.
I guess in those small, like your cult, it's concentrated, so maybe it's a bit more easy to see in extreme. Right. Whereas spread out over a country, it's a little less.
But recently in the impeachment hearings, it wasn't spread all over. This was a group of people, a Republican cult, that decided they were going to just back this no matter what. They knew. And when you had another Supreme Court justice that came in, lying his ass off, he got in. Not that everybody didn't know. People are just willing to be people of the lie, to keep the ship that they're sailing on safe. That's why people are still following John Roger and the guy who came after
He's
him.
passed.
He's passed.
Yeah.
And the new traveler, curiously enough, is the only staff member I accidentally walked in on when he was having sex with John Roger. So I know the lie has continued.
Yeah, right. Yeah, MSIA still exists. Yeah, that's a really fascinating way to end this conversation. Just applying this broadly, and how in all our lives we kind of have to. I don't know. It seems that societies have to accept some amount of untruth or something to kind of just keep things at peace or something like that. But in a cult, a small, relatively small group, it's just so much more extreme and obvious. But there is lessons to apply to all of us, and all, members of a country or even people living on Earth or something.
I
Just
tell my kids, just tell the truth, even and especially when it hurts. That's all that matters.
thanks so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Gosh, thanks for being here today, being witness to this powerful interview with Victor Toso. If you have more questions, reach out to me, and I can probably pass it on to Victor. If maybe you have questions, maybe you know someone in a situation like Victor was in, let me know. We're going to keep trying to do these interviews as much as I can. Studio space is becoming harder to find because of the obvious shutdowns of all public spaces, more and more in this country. But I'll keep doing what I can to come back every Monday afternoon with a new guest. Thanks again, Victor, for coming by. And thanks all.
Happy to be here.
All right. Thanks a lot. Let's see you guys next time.